Morning everybody. This is the start of the day. It's quite warm in here. It's going to be a long day for many of you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is David Cuthbertson. I'm the CEO of two companies, one called AssetGen, one called Mile, and I'm going to cover one aspect of some of the work we do, which is how do you document and manage connectivity. It could be power, it could be networks. I'm going to concentrate on fibre, because that's just the theme of the moment, but it doesn't matter. Effectively it's all about how do you manage large complex environments. My background is I used to run my own cabling company, but my core business was network troubleshooting. So you just have to go into environments and work out how does this work, because the user's got a problem. It could be software, hardware. But what came out of that was nobody had a network diagram, but nobody had a rack diagram. Nobody actually had an inventory list, and they were trying to understand things from a base, which is a bit difficult. And all I did is I just modified and then started getting into doing managed services. So I used to run voice and data networks and things as part of deploying environments, normally around Cisco and other things. On a parallel track, I also looked and said there must be at least some best practices and methods, and so I've spent a lot of time working with various industry bodies. I'm on the BICSI UK committee, if anybody familiar with BICSI, but I also used to run the British Computer Society's ITIL group. So I set that up to look at how do you manage change in large environments, and how do you understand risks and dependencies. And obviously connections are one type of dependency, but obviously a virtual server running on a physical is another dependency. An application talking to another is another dependency. So a lot of this is all about how do you manage complex environments. And from that, at the bottom there, I've become quite skillful in these different areas. And I know because people pay me, because they can't find those skills elsewhere. And as an industry problem, if any of you are in LinkedIn, I run the data center engineering group and also the data center operations group, because a lot of my focus is about best practice and how do you manage complex environments. We've had copper and fibre for many years. People still have problems managing it, I don't know why. But we have obviously increasing densities because of the amount of hardware that you can get now into racks, but the amount of connections that you need. But one mistake causes big problems. Particularly when we get into fibre environments, there's a lot of data going on down fibre. So nobody likes mistakes, but actually complexity causes mistakes. Spaghetti causes mistakes. And so when you start looking at how people manage things, and you start saying, well, wait a minute, that would be unacceptable to some people. To others, they don't know that that's wrong, that have unsupported cabling, and that I should try and find and understand things in different ways. How does this come about? Did anybody plan this? And the answer is, nobody actually thought about what was the best method. How should we do things? And of course, what you end up doing is you end up trying to work out what's already there with every project. And you spend time and you delay projects. But what you don't want to do is to pull the wrong cable when you're moving something or when you're installing things. And it can get to extremes. That's not me, but I have been like that, trying to work out when I was doing troubleshooting, because it was serious. All the cash points went down in the whole of England for one of the major banks many, many years ago with troubleshooting. And we were literally wading through lots of cable, trying to work out where did this cable go and what was the danger of pulling it out, because we had to do something. So get around a bit. It's not necessarily a problem here in England, it's a problem everywhere. So we get around. So I've got a project with Auckland Airport at the moment to document all the infrastructure within Auckland. We're currently doing the EE infrastructure with the mobile phone environments, where we're talking many tens of thousands of racks of equipment. But you don't want to go there to find out about it, you want to know how it works already. So a lot of this is all built on practical experience. More recently, a lot of our work is now getting dragged into cybersecurity, because it's very difficult to secure an environment if you don't understand it. But you try explaining a complex environment. Anyway, background. Let's get into the more detail of what we're going to be talking about. So we have a few challenges when it comes down to particularly the higher density environments, is we don't want to necessarily put in a fixed structured infrastructure, because the demands of a storage area switch or a blade server or some of the other more complex environments mean we need to actually say we have a very flexible infrastructure to be able to provide lots of connectivity. So actually modular cabling is a great way of doing that. You may be putting in some base infrastructure and then you put in as much as you need. Is it single mode or multi-mode? Is it copper? What type of copper? Where are the devices going? Well, we haven't designed yet, so we need to retain as much flexibility to the point we actually need it. When it comes to a planning, that becomes a bit of a problem because we need to actually have something that tells us not just about the cabling, but about the things that use it. And the most common thing that people use is spreadsheets. And they start to realise they get very big. Our own approach is we develop our asset gen software, which is a database-driven system, and it can cope with a very large scale. The other thing is you also need to have local environment awareness. You need to know how long it is, because otherwise you take patch leads that are too long. Or you have lots of rolls of cable everywhere. You can't have things that are too short. Easiest things to buy things that are too long. And of course you then get all the spaghetti. So we must be able to find a way to get the local environment of lots of different data centers or equipment rooms into the heads of a guy planning a change, so he doesn't need to do a site survey, because that takes time and cost. One of the projects we're doing is for a containers company worldwide. They have to go around every single container port and actually document the physical infrastructure so they can consolidate them all and upgrade them. Have you ever seen the size of a container port? It's just like an airport. Auckland Airport is 450 buildings all joined together. It takes a long time to wander around tracing wires. Why not bring that into a place? But actually, we still want flexibility. If we can change something within half an hour and add more connectivity, are we going to change the documentation that makes other people know about this? So there's the planning side and how long it takes to actually work out what needs to be done, often to give to a contractor or somebody who's qualified. We then have the build and operate side, which is actually we need to know where things are to be able to diagnose faults, but also to direct people operationally. Can you check this? Can you install that? Can you do an audit of some form? So quite often, I've got the wiggle, twist, pull and hope, is sometimes that's what people have to do. They have to wiggle the wires because they didn't label them. But there's 6 different ways to label a patch cable. Which method are you using? Does it help people avoid them having to actually trace cables manually? And then at the bottom there, well, it's all very good to try and follow these things. At some stage, you have to often apply this to a legacy environment. So a lot of our work is actually helping people with naming conventions and how do we capture a large infrastructure into a common system that can then be used for both project and operations. So there's quite a few different challenges there, and they span different teams. We've got planning teams, build and operate teams, and we have the problem of the starting point is not necessarily what we want. So how do we capture knowledge when the customer or the teams don't actually have that? Some of the things we're going to have to start to think about is, first of all, is that when we start looking, and because this is around fibre, I can cover other areas if you want, power and other infrastructures, but if we look at fibre, the first thing is we have lots of different types of presentation. You need to know the presentation to be able to plan what type of cables to take with you and to join things and to create inventories. Of course, those different presentation types are sometimes bundled up, and some of the more modern ones, such as MPO connectors, we actually have a lot of density there, but actually we have to realise and say what type of connectors do we have? Male or female, what type of keys and other things. To actually connect everything together, although the fibre may be common, what you may have to do is then create, my network switch wants LC ports, but I've got a modular cabling system that provides MPO connectors on all the modules. So, do I need any of these? So, how do I document that? I've got one cable, but actually I haven't. I've got 12 things. And then, of course, anybody here involved with MPO type connectors? You then have to then say, how are you cabling it up? Because I've got 12 duplex ports and things. Where does port 1 go? Is port 1 to the left-hand side on both of them? Is port 1 on the right-hand side? Is port 1 actually crossed over to port 2? Or port 2 cross 1, so we have transmit receive? If you don't know this, and you don't have this recorded and understandable, you've got to go and send someone to go and have a look, because there's a risk that you may actually not implement something correctly. And hence the reason, more site surveys. The worst thing, of course, is turning up with a bag of parts that don't match up. But that's normal. That's what happens. And then, of course, we then have how do we actually present those ports in different ways. We may have modular cabling where it's just inserts into a chassis. It could be copper or fibre, so we have very small modules, a port at a time. We may then have slot-in modules and cards with different types of densities and different types of presentation. Here's just a few examples of it. And then, of course, it doesn't stop you still badly cabling it, but actually what you end up with quite a lot. A lot of the work we're doing with mobile phone providers is they can't get enough density in a normal rack, so they have a rack dedicated just to optical fibre distribution. And so we might have 80 odd cassettes in one of these. Each has maybe got 12 to 18 ports. Every single one of them goes somewhere. But of course, there's a lot of density, and you can see there's various things to help with the cable management as part of that. These are just examples. Unfortunately, I don't think there's many of them out there at the moment. But to give you an idea, that's still not dense enough for some people. They still want more, because that's what the equipment needs. It needs that connectivity. And of course, what we may end up doing is we may end up putting a whole tray infrastructure above the actual racks before they even go in, so that you can lay all the cables, so you can leave it right to the last minute, and then lay the cable on the top, and then you can see you've got tubes then to put your fibres down to protect them, because there is some delicacy to the fibres. And then the end equipment, of course, you've got a whole load of fibre to get to them. And so there's many different methods and techniques. But what I'll show you is just a couple of things which will help you address some of these challenges. There's lots of problems, but it's nice to know some answers. So the first thing is, let's just take you through a very quick journey, because I've only got a few minutes. Typically from an IT perspective, they're often just wanting to think, I need to do these two things. I need to connect that box to that box there, that router to that switch or server or whatever. To actually make that happen within our infrastructure, we might have to actually go into various places and work out where are those boxes and how do we get between them and what are the different ports and what are the different modules to do that. So although it looks like a simple task from their perspective, you need to know which ports are in use, which ones aren't, where do I have capacity, do I need to add more capacity? Not so simple, is it? Especially if it's not even in one room, you have to get between rooms. It's even difficult within one room. But if I've got 100 racks, trying to understand what's already available and what I need to get engineered isn't so easy. So what we'll do is we'll create control systems to help address this. Typically, a lot of people will start with a spreadsheet where they'll start writing things in, and they'll create a spreadsheet like this saying, I want that device on the left, on that port, to be connected to that device and that port. And it's someone else's problem to work out how to do it. They give it to the infrastructure planning team or the data center team. That's a good start, but it's actually not enough, because typically what you'll need to do is put some additional information. So exactly where is that device? So we can work out where it is. Where is it in a rack? Is it a module that's in a device? Is it an IP address? That port that you're talking about, yes, it's a fibre port, but what speed does it go at? Is it a particular VLAN? Is there something else I should understand? I'll put in the connection area that you see there. Someone's going to have to put in, if it's a direct connect, what's the cable number? What's the connection? What colour is it? What should it be as a plan? Or if you implement it and then document it afterwards, you can say, actually, I've tested it and got it all working. And then the same on the other side. The spreadsheet gets a little bit bigger, as you can see, because you've got to accommodate all of those. But that's quite simple. We're not dealing with simple, we're dealing with complex. So what we have to do is now start thinking about modular systems. So when we start getting into things like this I think is a Corning unit, so it's got 48 modules, so we can have up to 1,700 ports in a rack of these, and I've got a couple of customers that use this particular technology. And there's one module there, which is probably, they could call it module 04A or A04, so they can do things. But it's great, we can add, we can put things in, we can complete the project. What's not so easy is, actually, what have we just done? What did they do? Where did they actually put it? How many spare ports on these modules do I have? This particular chassis of all these modules, how many spare ports do we have between that rack and that rack? Because some of them go there and some of them don't. So how do I comprehend and understand my backbone infrastructure between this? But what we have to do is we then have to start documenting how we go between all these concentration points or distribution areas. So we still have the device on the left-hand side and its port with all this detail. We still have the device on the right-hand side, but now what we've got to do is we've now got to create paths going through multiple devices. And where you see red here, is we have to start documenting these modules. So it's not just enough to say I go to this patch panel, I go to this patch panel and to this module. It doesn't make it very easy doing spreadsheets because it's so inconsistent. And this is just a single connection. You may find you may have 5 or 6 hops, so the spreadsheet gets. And of course, you still need to put in things. Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? Is there a cost? Has it been tested? Has it been documented? Probably not. In fact, nobody checks that. And that spreadsheet will grow. And I've seen spreadsheets probably 80 columns wide, trying to do things. So I use the same spreadsheet with just one connection between 2 things in the same rack, or it's one connection between 2 things in different racks and different halls in the data center. So we do have a problem of data, really. This is why spreadsheets have their problem and why a database solution ends up being what people tend to adopt. You also have to think about how are we going to reference these. So from a configuration management perspective, how do I understand the configuration of my cabling infrastructure as well as my storage networks, my data networks, my power networks, my control networks? And so I have to start thinking, what am I going to call the patch panel? So does anybody know the names of the standards or the numbers of the standards for labeling of cabling? Anybody in the room? Yeah. Chris does. You should go and talk to him and get him to design your infrastructure, because if you design it right, it's good. But there's different conventions. We might call a patch panel AB. We might call it patch panel AB in rack BO3. We might call it patch panel in new position number 5. Which one do you use? I don't know. So, well, go and have a look, because you probably use all of these. You might get more sophisticated, and you might actually start saying, from a database perspective, this is actually in New York, and it's a fibre module. So the one in red there, and it's in data center 5 and it's in hall 1. So we have administrative naming, which may be different to the labels on things. The label would just be C10. It's the C10 module, but the administrative naming may actually be unique across the world. And of course, that's only the chassis or the patch panels. What about the ports in them? Because port 1 here may go to port 10 there. They don't always go 1 to 1. And so it keeps me busy and keeps us very busy. And when we go and we actually update not just the patching is only one of the things you update when you actually change things. So if I was to put a server into a rack and connect it up to a switch in another rack, probably I may have to update all of these different things. So I may have to update asset lists and inventory lists, rack diagrams, which could be in Excel or Visio or CAD, patching records, which we were talking about. How many switch ports do we have free? I've just lost one of them. So actually I'm decrementing the capacity of both the power and the network. And further as we go down, we start getting into things which actually become less and less technical, and we start getting into more systems. So that server's part of an architecture. It may be running virtual systems. It may be a production server rather than a test server. I may have billing and charging data to get charged back to people. And of course, what we built and what we design may not be quite the same as part of this. So this is only one small part, the connectivity and the modular cabling, but it's particularly difficult because it's physical. You need to know where things are, and you need to actually embed that into your change and planning processes. And if we were just doing a connection, as I did earlier, there may be only a few of them to update if we're putting in a new fibre module. So most people don't have any one of these for their environments. The customers that we tend to work with want all of this in a system, because they realise there's a lot of duplication. It also helps to define your change processes. What's the interface between the person who requests the change, the person who accepts it, works out the design? How do they then create a build? How do they then involve a third party potentially, or their own people to do things? How do they commission and test? When does it go live? So we have to reserve things for overlapping projects, because some projects are immediate, next day, some may be a bit of a rollout, it takes 3 to 4 months, and we're already allocated the infrastructure. So that patch panel is actually full from a design perspective, but from a physical perspective it's empty. So if you did a site survey, you would not understand the fact that they're already allocated as part of this. Most people don't have that. They don't have these clear interfaces between people, so they don't know who updates and who controls things. So quite a lot of our work also gets involved in helping people to formalise those methods, those work practices. And so In the 20 minutes that I've got, there's got some minutes for questions. All I wanted to try and get across is if you want to avoid the type of spaghetti you saw earlier, there's simple things. One is you plan better. But if you can't plan, you must expect that people are going to turn up and do their best at the time with what they think is appropriate. So if they don't know the distances between things and they don't know the port types, they just carry big bags of stuff and they use whatever they can. But if you want to get the benefits of flexible modular systems, the great thing is you can change things so quickly. The bad thing is you can change things so quickly, none of your documentation keeps up to date with it. And you do need still to always go back and do verification checks. What we do within our audit system is we can pull out and say from our database, for this particular room in Singapore, what's changed in the last 4 months? Right? Because when one of our guys goes there, he knows which racks to go to then pull out and say, just check the cable management because we've had some recent works there, done by a contractor. And we've got a customer, MasterCard, the credit card company, who do all their data center and equipment room planning and design from St. Louis and Missouri worldwide. They never go to site. They have never gone to site. They've got 13 or 14 people who plan and manage every power and every network connection and every placement of equipment. And they control everything through the planning side. So the first thing is planning. You will have to get a baseline at some stage, and that's going to be difficult because you don't have one. But that's part of a process. Once you've got that, you can then start to have better interfaces between people. And tomorrow, it's going to be different. There's going to be even more different options. So there's going to be connector types, cabling types, interfaces on equipment, which are going to change the rules, and it's not necessarily going to be the same as today. So you're still going to have to keep evolving your change methods and processes. And if this has been useful for you, and you found that there's been a few things of interest, visit us on our AssetGen stand. We are running some seminars in March, and you'll see a piece of paper like this that's been done in conjunction with Network Centre, where we're doing half-day workshops on how you bring this all together and make it work. It's a bit difficult to do it in 20 minutes, but I hope that's been useful for yourself, and you've got a bit of an understanding that it can be done, and it's not difficult. People do manage to manage their cabling infrastructures. However, it doesn't happen by chance. It happens because of culture and also experience. So, got a couple of minutes for questions. Any questions from anyone? No? Well, people are thinking. That's good. Obviously, come along to the AssetGen stand, which is sort of just over that way, against that wall there, and see myself or any of my colleagues if you want to then look and then see, so what would a better system look like, or how do you do this? Most people know us not for managing connectivity. Most people know us for doing automated Visio diagramming, because one of the techniques we use is, let's draw all the documentation out of the database, let's create rack diagrams, let's create cabling diagrams, let's create floor plans, let's do architecture diagrams. But I've got 10 buildings, so I need 10 buildings worth. For EE, it's 34 data centers. So we've got 34 data centers and 12,000 racks to produce every night an update. You can try and do it manually, but I wouldn't advise it. Better to just automate it as much as possible. Okay, no questions? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.